Hello, Miles.
Hello, Tam. How are you?
I'm all right.
Cool. Well, good to see everybody here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, Jeffrey.
Morning.
Hi, how's it going?
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let's see. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. It's the magic hour. It's 10:31.
Yeah, we got about half the class in here, so we'll wait a few minutes before we really get
Okay.
cooking, I think.
Get cooking.
But did everybody have a good Halloween?
Worked on Halloween.
Worked on
Didn't
Halloween?
do a whole lot.
Yeah, it's kind of a rough Halloween, man.
I know.
Hopefully you guys had fun anyway.
I managed to carve some pumpkins, which was fun.
Good job.
Stay back for this Halloween.
Yeah, it wasn't like a raging Halloween. I mean, usually it's such a great holiday. It's fun, you know. Well, hopefully you guys.
Oh,
still
yeah.
have-
Cece's talking about the full moon. The full moon was pretty intense. I really loved it. And last night, the moonlight was really intense, too.
Yeah, it was super duper.
Mm-hmm. So, Miles and I thought that today we would explore some new software. First of all, the software that we showed last class just briefly, and today we're going to do basically some drawing exercises, so you can get a taste of using some painting software, which is a raster-based software that's different from Figma. But we're going to kind of take you through some of the features of this program. It runs in your browser, so it's really easy. Those of you who want to grab it now or kind of sign up, I'm going to paste the link in the chat. It's called Magma Studio, and I'll show you what the splash page looks like too. Here it is here. So you can basically just whack this button here, try Magma Studio for free. And it is free for individuals. And then it will just jump you right into making a painting or a drawing. So I'll give us a minute or two to kind of get that sorted out. It might give you like a login screen, and you can use your SOU Google account to just create an account. So I've already logged in or have an account up here. But if you're not signed in, the screen that it will show you is going to look probably something like this, where it gives you a modal. Yeah, it'll show something like this, and then you can just say join with Google, and that'll be your SOU account. And it should just take a second or so. That's all. So it should be pretty easy to get in there. And once most of you are in there, I'll talk a little bit about the features. But this is different from Figma. We spent some time last week talking about the difference between vector software and raster software. And one of the major differences is that the software is really designed to fill in pixels on a grid. And so some of the features that we use are going to be kind of different, but this is kind of more akin to maybe Photoshop or Procreate if you're using an iPad. It's software that's really set up for you to make images with individual gestures that have like a sort of painterly effect or like a brush sort of effect applied to them. So it is a bit different, but it's also fun. And so we're going to do a couple exercises today. One of the first things that I'd like you to pay attention to when you open this thing up is that it gives you a kind of widescreen rectangle like this. And depending on if that's your vibe or not, you can change that, and you probably should change that. So really what you should do is you should go File, New, make a new piece. And then you can actually set the the resolution, which is the size of the grid that you're going to use, in width and height. So you give your drawing a name, like maybe I'll call mine morning after Halloween, but I guess technically it's 3 mornings after Halloween now, isn't it? No, 2 mornings after Halloween. So that'll be the name of this picture here. And then in the size, that's how many pixels you want. The default is the same that most video files are in, 1920 by 1080. But I'd recommend that you do something a little bit larger than that. So like I'm gonna do a power of 2, 2048 by 2048, because I like to paint in a square. And then click create, and that'll make a new file for me that's a square. So feel free to use the default size, but also know that you can make your own size. Yeah, I'll stop for a second. I'll wait a second to see if everyone can kind of get in there. But what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to sort of go along with us today, if that makes sense. We'll all do some of these exercises together. And we're basically going to do some speed painting, which I've been doing a lot in my digital painting class. So I'll give you some prompts and we'll kind of exercise the software a bit and learn how to use it together. And then I'll show you also how to export files from this program and bring them into your notebook. Fritz, you're wondering how we change the canvas size again. I'll show you that real quick. And you know what, perhaps I'll even I'm gonna drop down my resolution so that way you all can see me a little bit better. That should be more clear coming in through Zoom, I think, looking at this interface. So to make a new file, new, and then you can set the size right here. So if I wanted to do 512 by 512, your drawing doesn't have to have a name, I don't think, or it could have a blank name. So this will give me a smaller picture. But I would recommend doing a picture that's 2000 by something, 2000 by 3000, something over 1000 pixels on either side would be best for this program. At least in order to show you kind of how all the tools work. Where are we at? Did everybody kind of figure that out? They were able to make a picture. I'm gonna go back to the one that I had. There we go. Let's see. Okay, seems like everybody's in there. All right, so I'm gonna give you a little tour of this interface. And those of you who have questions, I'll keep an eye on the chat, and I think Miles will watch the chat too, so let me know if you have questions. Cynthia said, accidentally made the background black. How do I change it? Well, one way you can change it is maybe you use the paint bucket tool to make the background black. That could have been it. But what you can do is you can go to the layer that you're on and you can delete that layer with this little trash icon on the right. So whatever layer you made black, you can just take that layer away. And that should kind of do the trick.
Oh, cool. It has pressure sensitivity.
Yeah, also those of you who have Wacom tablets, this application works great with those too.
Would it work on iPads?
I think it does work on an iPad, but I'm not sure. You might want to try. I think it's designed to, and I think in my digital painting class we tried this the first day, and some people were using it. But I don't really know how well it works with the Apple Pencil or what. I'm not really sure. I haven't tried it. So give it a shot though.
All right, and if it doesn't work, I already have another app I use to draw digitally on my iPad called Procreate, and it works pretty well. Some people can even animate on it too.
Yeah, and those of you, if for some reason you can't access this software today, but you're already used to drawing in your own software, or you have a program you can use that you're comfortable drawing in, then you're welcome to use that. But this is kind of just what we wanted to go over because it's the most accessible for everybody here. It's also a great way to kind of learn the basics of digital painting too. Okay, so let me go over some of these features here. This software is kind of like Figma in the sense that it's designed for multiple people to use simultaneously. So those of you who feel like you might want a buddy or something, or a painting buddy, if you, all you really have to do is take this link at the top and then share it with a friend, or click this invite button up here, and that will copy the link that's in the URL bar. And if you paste that link in the chat, for example, maybe I'll paste my link in the chat. Anybody who visits that link can go ahead and can actually paint with me. But the way in which that works is pretty specific. So each person in the painting is locked to a specific layer. And so the pixels you're working on, nobody else can really edit or nobody else can change. You have to sort of remove yourself from that layer or leave a layer or join a layer. So the way that the system works is there's like multiple images overlaid on top of one another. And at any given time, each person is sort of in charge of one of those layers of images. And those layers can be reordered. So they're kind of stacked on top or below each other. So you can see some people are already painting in my shared screen here. And those of you probably who are joining in this little document here, you might not have a layer, but I can produce some extra layers for you all. And you should be able to get in there, I think. There we go. How many people do we have in here right now? Like 10, 15? Quite a few. So anyway, that's the multiplayer capabilities. And what else do I want to show you? It's kind of a big idea here. I suppose that's good. That's good. All right, I'm gonna go over painting stuff. I'm gonna leave, I'll let you, those of you who wanna keep drawing in this document, I'm gonna leave you behind, unfortunately, because I'm gonna make a fresh one just so that I can demo more clearly. But feel free to keep doodling together in this one, and I'm gonna make a new file. My internet connection is a little bit shaky too, by the way. So if I'm dropping out, just let me know. Are you guys all still with me though?
Yep.
Yeah.
No? Okay, great. So I'm gonna leave behind that other document here. And that way some of you have a doodle space together. All right, so those of you who are following along, on the left side of the screen are going to be tools that you mainly use for actually editing or drawing your picture. So the tool that you're probably going to use the most is the paintbrush tool. This one over here, this little paintbrush icon. And the way you actually change what this tool does, you can go ahead and try to draw with it. The way you actually change what the tool does is based on the right side of the screen. So you have all these different properties like the size of the circle that you're using. And the way this basically works is all you're doing is pasting down or drawing circles. And what you're doing is you're drawing circles in a line like this, but depending on the sort of properties here, your circles are either going to be further apart or closer together. And as you can see, if I bring this density slider down, you can start to see the circles kind of, the sort of in-between circles. You see what I mean? If you can kind of see the circles are kind of pasted in a line. And so when you think about these different properties, size, minimum size, density, opacity, what you're really thinking about here is the individual circle. So the hardness, for example, will make those individual circles softer or more blurry. And then this final thing here, the stabilizer, is designed so that you can create smooth lines. So if I were to turn my stabilizer off and draw a little doodle, you'll see that it looks a little bit kind of like runny ink, like it looks a little bit sloppy. And then with the default stabilizer on, if I do a little doodle, for some reason it looks really smooth, right? The reason why this is available and not available to change is because depending on the pen you're using or the mouse you're using, your screen and like basically your input system for the software tracks points differently. So as your mouse moves along the screen, it basically records the X and Y coordinates of your mouse, and your mouse or pen or whatever can send coordinates at a faster or slower rate, depending on what hardware you have. So some people prefer a stabilizer and some people don't, and certain kinds of lines, you might want to turn that on or off. But just leaving it at the default is pretty good. All right, let's clear this layer. So that's a little bit about the brush tool. And one of the major things you're going to be using in the brush tool is size, right? You want to change the size of the brush. And I'm not over here on the slider right now changing the size. I'm actually using keyboard shortcuts. And the keyboard shortcuts that I'm using to change the size are the same in most painting software. It's the left bracket for a smaller size and the right bracket for a bigger size. So if you want to make the brush bigger, use the right bracket, smaller, use the left bracket. And that's pretty convenient when you're drawing. Right now I'm just drawing with the mouse, and you can see it's pretty easy to change size. And so for those of you who are using a mouse or a tablet right now, I would suggest that you just doodle around while changing the brush size. Get used to hitting those two keys, the left bracket and the right bracket. So next is basically color. Color is probably one of the most important things that you're gonna have to understand. And this little color picker is pretty easy to get a hold on, but I'll show you kind of sort of how it works. So this ring on the outside, that ring basically represents what's called the hue in this color model. So by hue, who knows maybe what hue is? Who can tell me what hue is in the class? What does hue actually mean in this system?
That's like the like luminescence and saturation of a color, isn't it? Oh no, I'm sorry, the ring, right? Like,
yeah, so this ring here is what would change the hue. And then this box is what's going to change, Tam, what you're saying is the luminosity and the saturation, actually. So here's an easy way to kind of think about it. So no matter where you are on this outer ring, whether you're in blue or red or orange, you can always have white or black. So if you put this little circle at the top left, no matter where you go on the outer ring, you see these numbers on the top right that represent the color. It's always going to stay all white. Now, if you bring it all the way down to the bottom left, it's always going to stay all black when you rotate around. You see this? And even if you bring it all the way to the bottom right, it's going to stay all black too. However, anywhere along the left side is going to change or is going to stay the same when you move the circle around. But these numbers change, see? So on the left side, you have changing numbers, but they'll stay the same no matter what color you're on or what hue you're on. And on the bottom, it's always going to be 0 no matter where you are on the axis. Whereas anywhere else in this square, if you change the circle, those numbers are going to change as well. And so one of the most useful things that you can learn about a color picker like this is like, what if I want to make a grayscale picture? If you want to make a picture that's all black and white, you only use the left side of this square. And the left side of the square represents no hue, in other words, no saturation, and a gradient or a fade from white to black on the top left to the bottom left. So I was thinking maybe, why don't right now, why don't we all spend about, I'll set a little timer for about 5 minutes. And we're gonna come in here and just using the paintbrush tool, we're gonna make a black and white or grayscale painting just using this slider here. So you can pick your color using the left side of the circle like this. And so I'll set a timer for 5 minutes, basically starting now. And so feel free to doodle or create a black and white picture using the brush size. Change the brush size. Feel free to change some of these properties like the opacity, the density, or the hardness, but stick to just grayscale. And I'll give you a 2.5 minute warning. Right now we're at about 4 minutes. I'll do a little painting here. Those of you who aren't painting, or who are more interested in just watching to learn, you can feel free to watch me. But when the 5 minutes is up, I'll ask those of you who've done a picture, if you want to share, you can take a peek at everyone's. And I won't speak that much, but those of you who have questions or are watching me, feel free to ask questions or just throw a question out there. Now, some of you here are probably really familiar with painting in software like this or making pictures this way, and others are just getting started, or this is maybe your first time, but don't worry so much about that. If it's your first time, it's okay. You're just getting used to how this thing works. Just about halfway there. Remember, we're sticking only to grayscale of this color picker here. Feel free to play with the stabilizer feature or try out some different things. Two minutes left. I'm not watching the chat right now, but I'll catch up on it when the time's up. Just one more minute. Thirty seconds. $15. All right. Let's put our pens down for a second. So there's a few things that I'd like to show you in addition to what I've already shown you before I just have you all share, and feel free to kind of finish up your paintings if you want. But if you pay attention to my screen share, so one thing I showed you was the left bracket and the right bracket being used to change brush size, which is pretty important. And then we talked a little bit about that color picker that's over on the right, and how to get only gray values out, only colorless values out. So black, and then the grayscale range. And we'll talk a little bit more about color in a second. But before I do that, and before we share a little bit, I also want to show you probably the tool that you're going to be using the second most while digital painting. The tool that probably every digital painter uses. And that's this one over here, the eyedropper tool. And the eyedropper tool is really important because it allows you to pick and sample colors from your canvas. So if I click the eyedropper tool and then go down to the bottom here and click, watch my color picker on the right, and you can see how it jumps. And anywhere I click will remember or select the current color. Now, the way that most people use this tool is very, very quickly while they're painting. So if you watch me paint now, I'm making a white circle. And what if I wanted to edit this form somehow? I can quickly pick the color outside of the white circle and come in and modify this form, and then pick the color inside. And I can very quickly oscillate between switching these colors and sort of have an additive or subtractive process of building a form or building a shape. Now, notice how I'm not going over here and selecting the tool with my mouse. I'm sort of holding a key down, and when you hold the key down, it selects this tool, and when you let the key go, it goes back to your brush tool. And the reason why it does that is because people use this so much. So this is going to be the Alt key, basically, the Alt or the Option key on your keyboard. Alt. So the Alt key is the eyedropper. And so in addition to the color picker, the brush tool, and the brush tool, the eyedropper is probably the one thing that you're going to use the most. And this sort of trifecta of tools, so the brush, being able to change the size of the brush and some of the properties of the brush, combined with the eyedropper, and also just directly picking colors, you pretty much have most of the, you might say most of the rules down for making a digital painting. Those are the three actions that digital painters will do most of the time, right? And everything else that they do, whether it's from copying an image or trying to build a complicated illustration or using layers or using other advanced features, those all are kind of in service to this main activity of painting, which is really just about picking colors and picking how those colors are going to lay down next to each other. And so being able to do that quickly is really important, right? Being able to change the size of your brush without thinking about it, kind of like you're riding a bicycle, and being able to switch colors is really the kind of skill that I want you to take away from this today, especially if you're just starting out. How to build forms quickly just using your mouse or keyboard. And it works great whether you have a tablet or whether you don't and you're using a mouse. You know, these methods work using the keyboard shortcuts, which is what I'm using at the moment. All right. Well, I'm kind of using a mix of my mouse and my tablet, but you get the idea. So why don't we have some people share? Does anybody want to share their black and white pictures? Maybe? Just have a few people share and then we'll move on to exploring color a little bit. Oh, and Nick is saying the middle mouse also works for the eyedropper. Yeah. Some of you are kind of sharing some tips in the chat, which is cool. Yeah, does anybody want to share?
I could share mine.
Sure. Yeah, let's see. Oh, nice.
This is my, I don't know what it is, dog, cat. And he's got a little pumpkin on his head because I miss Halloween.
Cool.
Nice.
And so it looks like you're using the paint bucket tool, right?
Yeah, I used it in a few spots.
Gotcha.
And I actually found this thing that you can do, like when you draw a line and you hold down shift, like it draws like a straight line.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah.
I was kind of just doing that sort of thing.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Isabel.
Yeah.
Your character almost looked, that cat almost looks a little bit like Isabel from Animal Crossing. I know Isabel's a dog, but it's kind of slowly
sort of.
reaching in that direction. At least in terms of cuteness. Okay, sure, yeah. Why don't you share?
I also did a cat. My cat with
nice.
a hair tie. Might have to take Zoom back. It's freaking out on me.
Oh yeah, I think we're having some, you know, you might want to, Chris, when you share your whole screen, because,
Okay.
oh, yeah.
Did I not? I don't know how to do that. I don't know how
I'm not sure.
I'm gonna stop.
You stop sharing, and usually
Yeah,
it's the upper left-hand corner.
There. It kept, my whole screen just kept going black. Sorry about that.
Are you gonna give it another shot?
Oh, do you want me to try again?
Try one more time and share your whole screen, like share your whole desktop. If you want to try.
Let's see.
You could also take a screenshot and put it in the chat or upload it into the Zoom chat and we can look at it.
All right, give me a second if anybody else wants to go.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, anybody else want to share?
I'll go. Should I go?
Sure, Ian, yeah, go ahead. Aw, nice. You didn't have time for the legs, though.
He doesn't have legs.
Oh, he doesn't have legs. Sad.
What you get?
I like him.
Yeah, it looks like it would be great for kind of it reminds me of Salad Fingers, Flash animation days. And you're working on 2 layers there, right? So you didn't use the paint bucket tool, did you? You painted
No, I
underneath?
just colored it in.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, I'll go over that in a second. I'll go over multiple layers in just a minute here. Thanks for sharing.
All right.
All right, let's see a couple more. Anything else?
I'll go.
Okay,
Oh,
Tam.
sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Who's going first?
You can go.
Yeah,
I'll go?
Stephen.
Okay. Mine was just, I'm on the shared thing, the shared one, and
Oh God.
I'm technically on Zoom twice because I'm on my phone, but I also have to screen share it, so I'm on my computer too. But I just took a gesture drawing I was doing and then just added some bits to it. This one.
Oh, great.
So I just did that. So I was working on just doing sketches, and then I did all the underlying like anatomy stuff, but then I just covered it all up to do the painting part. And I just did
Gotcha.
like a
So you
quick
did like a
sketch.
cool. Yeah, awesome.
I decided to
And you're
just like
using
not
the-
change the brush size because I didn't really need to for what I
Yeah.
do technically usually.
Yeah, I think one thing that's an interesting interesting decision that you made. I think a lot of times, one thing I'll talk about, or could talk about for a long time, is how most of this software that we use has so many options, and that trying to decide what you need versus what the software can do is often like a big part of creating an aesthetic for your pictures or your project. Like saying to yourself, I will only use one brush size for this picture, will create a certain kind of look, but also turn it into a little bit of a challenge for yourself in terms of like how you might think creatively.
Yeah, my normal drawings tend to be one brush size for all the lines and all the sketches, and then I'll just use like assorted brush sizes for the coloring.
Cool, great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. All right, Tam, do you want to share? And then maybe that'll be the last one.
Yeah, sure. Here we go. I just doodled my character from Final Fantasy 14.
Oh, nice. Is that the MMO?
Yeah. I'm pretty used to, digital art programs, so I also tend to use only one brush size.
Mm-hmm. And why is that? It seems like you're using a tablet, and the lines, if you look at Tam's lines, you can see that they're tapered. So some of them are thinner at certain parts or thicker at certain parts.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like, I tend not to, like, make custom brushes or anything. I guess that's kind of disorderly for me. But it's just, I don't know. I never think to do it while I'm drawing, so.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, it seems like you kind of have a good hold on how you want to draw on the computer. Like you've been doing it for a while. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and then show a few other features of this program, and also just tell you a little bit more about some digital painting theory at the same time. So here's my black and white picture, and a few things I didn't share that are really nice in this program specifically. Well, first of all, you can zoom in pretty easily from the top and bottom. And those of you who might be privy to wanting to know the keyboard shortcut for this, it's usually Control plus or Control minus or Command plus or Command minus on your keyboard. And I would say that having a hold on your zooming keyboard shortcuts is pretty good, although not as important as just your painting shortcuts. A lot of artists are kind of divided at times on when to zoom in or how to zoom in or whether you should zoom in at all. Because when you zoom in, it often crops your image and you might lose part of the bigger picture. And some software, not this one, but Photoshop and other painting applications, if you're zoomed in, will usually show you a little thumbnail of your bigger picture. But know that the zooming functions are right there at the top, and they're really easy to and convenient to use. Another thing that's really nice about this program is that you can flip the image horizontally. Now, when you flip the image horizontally, does anybody know why would you want to do this? And notice how when I do this on the bottom left, it says flipped. And so what I'm doing here is I'm not changing the pixels of the image or changing the I'm not actually changing the pixels in the layer itself, but instead what I'm doing, you can see how the layer thumbnail doesn't actually change. All I'm doing is giving myself a reversed view, like as if I'm looking at the picture in a mirror. Does anybody know why that might be useful?
It gives you a sense of
So
if
you
you're.
can. Oh,
Oh. Go ahead.
oh. It's so you can see little mistakes that you might have not seen with it flipped the original way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Exactly. One of the big ideas here is often for lighting. Lighting and form, right? Because people you tilt your head a certain way, or you kind of think about things a certain way. You're using your right hand or your left hand to draw with. And so because of that, forms can tend to sort of shift, or colors can tend to sort of like have a kind of directionality to them. Like in this picture here, obviously things are kind of leaning more towards the right. And when I flip it, you see the directionality changes. But if you wanted something where it looked more like a person was standing up, or this like scarecrow-like figure was standing up straight, it's easier to understand the direction when you toggle between the different flips like this. Another thing you can do really easily is you can rotate the picture. And rotation is also really useful, especially if you're using because of your input device. So sometimes it's just nice, just like when you rotate the page and you're using a pencil, or rotate your notebook to get the corner. It's also useful to be able to rotate digitally. And zooming, rotation, and flipping are all good, but the one thing you really should know about, probably one of the most useful things, is to use these in tandem with this hand tool over here. And the hand tool, all it really does is it lets you pan around or move the page around. And the hand tool is actually, so this little button here resets the rotation. The hand tool is so useful that just like the Alt on the eyedropper, the hand tool is always pretty much going to be the space bar. And so whether you're in Photoshop or and by the camera, and you're moving the camera left to right, space allows you to pan. So notice how here I'm drawing with my brush. And then all I have to do is hold down the space bar and move a little bit to the side. And so used in combination with zooming, you can get a better idea of how you might navigate your image. And so I would say that the most important shortcuts, for me anyway, and for most painters, are the shortcuts to change color, change some of the properties of your brush, and also change how you're looking at the actual entire picture yourself, right? So these three areas, changing your brush, manipulating color, and also changing your view on the whole thing, represent, I would say, probably the three categories of what you want to focus on while you're painting, right? How am I looking at my overall picture? What colors am I picking? How am I thinking about color? How quickly can I pick a color? And how quickly can I change or manipulate the thing that I'm drawing with, which is the brush? And all this stuff comes before some other big ideas in digital painting software. And I would say the biggest idea after all this is layers. The idea that you can have multiple pages overlaid on top of one another. And so if I were to come in here on layer 4 and draw something, maybe I'll pick something really green. Notice that you can't even see what I'm drawing, unless I turn this layer on and off. So right now I'm drawing underneath the top layer, and this can confuse a lot of people when they first start out using layers, is they don't really understand that layer 4 is, a lot of times people might think their software is broken because they're like, oh, I'm trying to draw. but they're actually on a layer, and they've moved from layer 5 to layer 4 or to a layer underneath. So layers are interesting in that you can sort them, you can shift them. And so now this layer here is on top, and anything I paint, you can see. But layers also have special properties. For example, layers can fade into each other. They can also blend into each other using something called blending modes. And I won't go into this too much, but know that it's here. And this is standard in most software that has layers these days, whenever you're dealing with raster layers. And specifically in this software, if you're doing multiplayer, you can leave a layer or join a layer. So the idea that you can say goodbye to a layer and that might open it up to somebody else to work on is a special feature of this program, and will probably be a feature that will start to appear in the software that we're more familiar with, whether it's Procreate or Photoshop. So this idea of how you might paint with multiple people is kind of a novel thing or a new thing right now that we're looking at in this program, but it's something that already kind of works. You know, this is kind of how Figma works, but this is also where the industry is going in general. So this idea of having a layer that you own or having an object in this creative environment that you're responsible for, and then removing yourself of that responsibility or giving it away to somebody else is something that we're probably going to be having to get used to a lot when working with other people. Does anybody know why that system might be in place though? Why is it that you can't just paint on the same layer at the same time with other people? Why would they have to have this kind of joining, leaving, or taking over layers idea? Any guess?
Is it like some form of collaboration between each of them? Like if one person like has an idea but doesn't know how to complete it, they leave it up to the others to do it to see if they can match their ideas.
Yeah, that's a. So what you're asking is it in the service of collaboration so that one person can kind of continue their idea, and sort of like and sort of then let go of it. Lita, you have a lot of background noise, just so you know.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in the kitchen now.
Okay. So yeah, I'll rephrase your question so that way you don't have to talk so much. But yeah, one idea here is that, oh, maybe this joining leaving thing is related to an idea of how people should collaborate. Are there any other thoughts on why that might be the case? Because that's not how Figma works, right? In Figma, everybody can do everything all at once. So why would there be that difference? You know, these two programs work differently.
It's not vector based, so it's easier to mess up someone else's work if you're on the same layer.
Mm-hmm. So Tam's saying because it's not vector based and everything is on this pixel grid, and if I zoom in here a lot, we can start to see these pixel grid, right? So you can, and you're saying it's easier to mess up somebody else's work because maybe there's more things to change. That's a good bet.
Yeah, Emery had that kind of, a computer can't process two different instructions, you know, how to resolve those conflicts maybe.
Right, yeah, so that is basically the idea, is resolving conflict. And so primarily it's a networking thing, right? So the idea here is like, imagine you had two people on the same layer and they were wanting to paint, right? And one person is in San Francisco and they're painting circles like this, right? And then another person might be, I don't know, in India, and they're painting like this, right? And this person wants to paint this way, but as they're painting this way, the other person in San Francisco is painting this, right? And so the points of intersection, right, where you need a lot of feedback, you need a lot of immediate feedback, right? But the internet just isn't fast enough to give you that immediate feedback. And so if you were painting on the same pixel grid, covering all these pixels with different people, unless you were only allowed to maybe fill in 1 pixel at a time or 2 pixels at a time, there would be a lot of conflicts where you would think you drew over something, but actually somebody else drew over it first. And so things would flicker. And depending on the strategy you want to use to resolve those conflicts on the server, that kind of runs this whole game, let's say, this whole multiplayer experience, the users would maybe suffer from that. So the idea here is, because there could be so many conflicts because of the delays, that what they do is they give each person a whole layer, and they basically just stream those layers to you in the same way that you might get a Netflix show streamed to you. So because you're not responsible for it, you also can't edit it. And therefore, if it's a little bit delayed, then that's okay, right? Because it doesn't affect what you're doing. And so this is an innovation in the software that I think is kind of interesting, and it works really well. And so that's why I think we're going to start to see it in other applications pretty soon too.
It's interesting.
But I think this. Go ahead, Miles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was just thinking, like, I mean, how you mentioned, like, it's basically related to that problem of a multiplayer game too. You know, how
it's multiplayer video game programming algorithms.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing is, in most multiplayer games, you don't have to deal with that much information.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in a game like Fortnite, for example, you really just have characters. I'll kind of show you. In Fortnite, you might have, or a multiplayer game like what's that new game? Among Us. So in Among Us, you might have these little characters, and each character might only just have a few numbers associated with them. Hold on, you guys, my connection's a little bit shoddy right now. There we go. All right, I'm back, sorry. So like in Among Us, you might have these little characters, right? And each character might have 2 numbers, like an X and a Y number. But the way that the graphics and stuff are drawn on your screen, those images are loaded for you and stuff like that. And so if those characters clash, if those 2 X and Y numbers are the same or something, you want to know, like, let's say if a bullet hits something, or if one character punches another, or if one jumps on another, all you have to do is understand if these 2 points are basically intersecting, right? And that's a very different problem. It's actually a much easier problem to solve than, let's say, dealing with all these pixels with all different color values, right? So even really complicated multiplayer games tend to actually be reducible to simple interactions of just a handful of numbers. And so even if you're playing a giant game like Fortnite, one thing that Fortnite does is it zones stuff off. So if you're in this big Fortnite island, you know, this big Fortnite map with 100 players, depending on where you are in the map, it only keeps track of a couple different things. And when you enter into another grid square, it only keeps track of the things in that particular square, the players in that square, the explosions, the bullets flying. And so the game only ever has to calculate a little bit of stuff around the players that are interacting. And then those things are basically added up and sent to the scoreboard. So every player doesn't have to run the calculations of every other player. And so most video games tend to divide themselves up quite well this way. But notice how in Fortnite, we're talking dividing a grid with not that much information. And here we have a grid where every piece of information in the grid is important, right? And so it's a much harder problem actually to do multiplayer painting, which is why we don't see, you know, how come we don't have multiplayer 300-person painting software? This is kind of the reason why, because it's a difficult problem to solve. I just thought that was kind of an interesting tangent to go on. Because sometimes, like, you think that this is just for a design reason, but actually it has to do with the fact that the materials or the networks are set up in such a way where you just can't do certain things. You know, it's just hard to do it. And so you have to make compromises.
Yeah, I mean, that whole networking thing is really interesting. And I think that's, you know, anyway, well, we don't have to go on and on about this now, but like, it is interesting how the implications aren't necessarily understood at the time you develop the technology. I mean, just think about the internet itself, right? Like, you know, like, hey, this is great. We can share our physics research with each other. It'll be across the planet. It'll be great, you know. And then, yeah. So this will be interesting. This graphic, like you're saying, Jeffrey, this kind of, you know, what does it mean to have this kind of graphic interchange? We don't know yet, right? This is so kind of new in a way to be able to have this networked painting thing going on.
Yeah, and you know, the networks that we're using right now are also being upgraded to, you know, the wireless networks are being upgraded to 5G. 5G is going to be a little bit faster than most home Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
And so as as the networks increase in capacity, we also tend to see different applications that sit on top of them. Yeah. So in the days of 3G, mm-hmm. we got Instagram, mm-hmm. and before 3G, in the days of broadband, we got YouTube.
Yeah.
And before broadband, in the days of 56K modems, which a lot of you here probably don't remember, I barely remember, we got web comics. Mm-hmm. So the idea that the network capacity of the computational environment dictates the types of things that you can do, you know, the types of games that you can play, the types of images you can share, and that is kind of changing is really interesting.
Yeah.
Emery is saying a computer isn't meant to process two differing instructions of code. What's your question, Emery? Maybe I can clear that up because it might be, I think it's related to something I said. If you want to.
I think they were just talking about an answer to why would the layer system be set up the way that it is. I think that was an answer.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. And it has mostly it's due to delays of the network. Okay. So let's go back to the software here. I will share, I'll talk a little bit more about the color picker and a little bit about how digital color works. And I'll kind of present to you a model for understanding this, this color picker here. So this color picker is what's called, well, basically, how do I put this in a pleasant way? Color is a big topic, and there are different ways of thinking about how color actually could be modeled, right? So what's the difference between red and blue, and what's the difference between a dark red and a dark blue and things like that, right? Now, when it comes to computers, everything has to be represented in numbers, right? So I'm going to put a kind of a gray here, a neutral gray-ish, almost a neutral gray, and I'll give you a sense for how this color system works. So most digital painting software is going to give you this HSV range. And so H is going to be like your rainbow color, right? And that's going to be hue. So let me write hue here. So the hue is really like what color of the rainbow are you using, right? And that's an idea of pure, of kind of pure color, right? And hue is usually going to be on a wheel. So you think 0 to 360, like a clock in degrees. And so hue is really kind of like, when you think of hue, think of rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, etc. So you can kind of think of hue like this way. Now, hue is easy because technically you're only just going around from 0 to 360 here, right? There's just one number that you're dealing with. It looks like a circle. It looks kind of like you're moving in two dimensions, but really all you're doing is you're going on a line from here to there and back again, right? It's just that that line in the interface looks like this, right? So hue is really just a line from 0 to 360 or 0 to the max. And on that line, you move between all the colors of the rainbow, right? So you kind of have the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the teal, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see you're moving across this line. And if we were to sort of, you know, repaint this hue wheel, you can get a sense for how it actually kind of works. Now the middle square is a little bit more complex. At the top right of the middle square, you're always going to get that sort of pure rainbow color. And the top right is representing basically the lightest that you can get, right? And the most saturated that you can get. So if we move up and down on this square, the sort of y-axis of this square is what's called value. Let's make this a bit darker. So value is a line as well, an individual line. And value goes from, let's say, black to, or let's talk about it this way. Value goes from no light to the maximum amount of light. So I'll put a little light bulb here. And it's also on a line, right? So that's why I was saying if you only use the left side, you go from black, no light, to white, the maximum amount of light. And then it also exists on this line. It's just that this line is going like this, right? Up and down. And the last bit is something called saturation. And saturation is also a line. And saturation is, if you only had value, you could only go from gray to white or black to white. And so moving from left to right mixes in the hue or fades in the hue value. So these pure hue values, the ones that you would get at the top right, those get sort of mixed in or sort of averaged with the value. So if the value is, let's say, in the middle and your saturation is in the middle, then you'll get a kind of neutral tone. And a lot of digital painters will tell you that staying up in this top right range where things are really cool and really bright is actually something that they stay away from a lot. And most painting actually occurs in this region here, where some things are kind of neutral. And generally use brighter colors for light highlights or spot colors. But of course, it really depends on what your style is for making a picture. But most people who would sort of try to draw things that look realistic or look like a photograph, most photographs themselves will be kind of in this range. They won't be at these extremes everywhere. So saturation is also a line, but this line goes this way. And it's how much, this is the interesting part, okay, about saturation. Saturation is not really its own thing, right? Saturation is how much do you take from here and how much do you take from here, right? So technically these should be a little bit reversed. So the hue is actually over on the right and the value is on the left, right? So the saturation is technically what's called a modulator or modulation. Saturation is the crossfade between pure hue and pure value. Does that kind of make sense? So you can pick your pure hue like red, yellow, green, blue, or you can pick your pure value, white, gray, black. But when you move from left and right, you're cross-fading between the pure hue and the value. Does that sort of make sense? This interface doesn't really show it very well, but that's kind of how it works. And I can show you the way that this interface is designed. Is technically here we have three lines, right? Three axes. The H. Whoops. We have the H. We have the V and the S. We usually say HSV, hue, saturation, value. The S being the thing that actually modulates or tells you where you're at between the two. And this can be represented usually best represented as a 3D object because there's 3 lines, which means that you can think about it as a 3D form. So I'll just show you an HSV cylinder maybe. And so this is one of the best ways to kind of understand this system. If you can wrap your head around this, this is what this interface is kind of designed to be showing you. So, oh, that's not a great image, but so hue is going around, saturation is going from the inside to the outside here, and value is up and down, right? So you have this relationship between all of them. And there are different ways of trying to model this stuff. And not only that, but hue, saturation, value is not the only way of modeling color. For example, this is a different geometry where you have a concept called chroma. And so just because this software that we're using here kind of does its sort of HSV thing, doesn't mean there's not other ways to represent color. And also the way that your computer monitor represents color is not in this way. This is just a useful model for people who are picking colors who might be painting, right? But the way that your computer actually represents color is using 3 other numbers, RGB. How much red do you have? How much green do you have? And how much blue do you have? And then it sort of fades between those to get your pixel color out. So this is what your monitor actually uses, but this software here uses a different system. And it's important to understand the system because the reason why the system exists is to help you as a painter, basically, pick colors and kind of understand where you are within this space. And also know that whatever system you choose also is going to dictate kind of how you choose, how you select colors, or how easy it is to move between different kinds of colors. But this has pretty much been the established kind of standard for digital painting software. Almost every painting program uses the HSV color model. Are there any kind of questions about that?
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting way of thinking about it. I encourage those of you who are kind of into this to also look up other color models too, because what we're talking about here is not just how the color interface works, but when you think about it, why does a color interface exist? Basically, it's giving you it's like going to a restaurant and they're like, these are the colors that are available and you can mix and match them in these ways, right? And even though you can technically reach any color here that your monitor can represent, the way in which you have to reach that color determines the choices that you make. So other color methods or other methods of picking color could also determine or show or make you paint differently, for example. So there are other menus that have been designed and ways of thinking about color that could be even better for painters. So the reason why we're using this system is partly tradition and partly because everybody kind of knows it or is easy to teach. But it might not be best for everybody, and it might not be the best system in general.
So is the only way to be able to color something in is by changing the actual color of the paintbrush and then coloring in that way? That's the only way to color something in, or are there other ways?
There are other ways, like you can use the paint bucket tool, for example. So if I were to, on a single layer, make a shape like this, and this shape was sort of filled in like with a solid color, I can go in here and use the paint bucket tool, and the paint bucket tool has some options here for how you might want to fill something in. But basically that uses an algorithm in which you can see here it doesn't really work that well, but that's because my tolerance is set too high. So the idea here is that you've drawn a shape, and then the paint bucket tool is a little algorithm that looks at where you clicked and then starts inching out, right? And it starts to fill in all the pixels everywhere until it reaches a certain, what's called a threshold of difference or a tolerance, right? And it tolerates different colors up to a point, but then it will no longer tolerate them, if that makes sense. And so the more pixels that you tolerate, the more likely it is that you can fill something in, right? So if I bring my tolerance really high, I'll fill in more stuff. If my tolerance is really low, I'll fill in less stuff depending on if it's different. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I was having an issue where it would just like paint everything, so the tolerance level helps.
Was probably really high. Yeah. I would like to tell you though that this tends to be really ugly, right? Or like it might not necessarily fit the aesthetic of using your brush, because it's usually these hard edge kind of things and it can be messy. So it might be good for when you're starting out a drawing, like filling things in. But honestly, my recommendation would be that you just get good at changing your brush size and fill stuff in manually.
Okay.
And depending on your painting method, you know, like a lot of painters will paint kind of underneath first in big batches of color and then kind of carve things out, right? And so you can paint in a direct way where you really are building shapes and forms of color, and then you're slowly arriving at your picture. You can also paint in a way that's indirect, and an indirect method of painting might be one that might be what most people are familiar with, which is doing a kind of underlying sketch first, right? You do some kind of structural sketch underneath, you know, and then once you have your sketch, only then would you maybe add on to it or like sort of ink it or then think about coloring, right? So the idea that you might have a process in which you sketch, then line, then color, right? A lot of people would maybe separate these on different layers as well. So you would eventually delete your sketch layer and have one layer for lines and one layer for color. This is kind of a common algorithm that a lot of people use in order to like sort of have a painting process. But just because people do this doesn't mean that your painting process has to fit that. And there are all kinds of examples, for example, of painters throughout history who have had different painting processes that yield really great results. So like one example would be, I don't know, Cezanne, for example, really well known for having a direct painting process in which there's no underdrawing being made. There's no sketch being made. It's just directly painting and building the forms. Morandi is another good example, an Italian still life painter. Here's a pretty fantastic painting where you can see subtle color relationships are happening, but you can also get a sense that this thing feels very direct, right? There's not a whole lot of structural sort of things happening underneath the sort of surface of the paint.
And in a way, that subtle modulation, that's kind of almost the distinguishing feature of painting, you know, and what we talk about a painting program versus like Figma, which we've been using, which is like binary, which is like either it's this color or it's not. I mean, barring, I mean, if you use something like a gradient, which is like an algorithmic, you know, variation, but otherwise it's like solid color. Or if you think about the Matisse cutouts, those are like Figma, you know, which is like when you're using scissors, either there's a cut or there's not a cut, you know, so there's like a binary split. And so something like Morandi, you know, you've got that really beautiful modulation of, it's basically this one color, but there's all this subtle change in the light. That's really painterly. And you can do that kind of stuff in Magma Studio,
right?
And Figma.
Yeah, that stuff would be easy in Magma Studio, but hard in Figma. And another thing, and this, a drawing like this is kind of maybe the in-between, right?
Yeah.
Like you might see somebody do a digital painting that has a lot of underdrawing or line drawing in Photoshop, or you might see somebody construct a line drawing like this in a vector application. And depending on what they're using it for, you know, whether it's for an architectural plan or whether it's just to paint a building, right? It tends to be that you can kind of think about the way in which people paint images as a choice too. So it's like, do you paint in a structural way where you sort of design the lines of the form first, or think about that and then color it in? Or do you start from the top, from what you see, and then sort of just apply color to the surface, right? So yeah, Miles, you're kind of right. It's like different software kind of tends to push you in either direction. And also, of course, different teachers that you have or different artists that you like tend to go in one of those directions. But exploring those different directions for yourself can be really good.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, just like in, as coming from a really like old school painting background, I mean, how that thinking of like this, like Morandi, I mean, that was cool that you showed Morandi, because like that, he's in a way, he's kind of like the ultimate, like he's a painter's painter, where it's about like, it's really about all of the nuance and subtlety of like painting, so that was cool. I mean, I don't know, it's funny. And that's something that tends to just be like, woo, until something like a digital approach. It's just not, because like the subtlety of working with pixels is not the same. You're basically working with this data, and like someone like Morandi, it's really about the very particular experience of smearing this colored dirt around on a piece of cloth.
Right. Yeah. You could almost say that there are these funny terms that Miles is using, like painter's painter, or the term painterly. Some of us in the class, maybe we don't maybe know what those terms mean. Does anybody have an idea of what does painter's painter mean, or what would painterly kind of mean? Like, and maybe how could what would a digital painter's digital painter be? What would digital painterly be? In that respect. Because I guess what you're talking about, Miles, is with this painterly idea, is really the idea that somehow the image, if the image is made in paint, that you can somehow tell that it's made in paint.
Yeah, one way this occurred to me when you asked that question, I thought it was actually pretty cool. Like if you look at those Morandis again, just pull one of them up. The way I would think about it, and I hadn't really thought about it until you just asked that, but I think about it a lot in terms of subject matter, where this isn't like, oh, that's so badass, I want to play that video game, or something, right? It's like, if there's something about, or like even looking at like the drawing that Bernini drawing, I don't know if that was by Bernini or of a Bernini, but like,
yeah, that was hard to tell, wasn't it?
Yeah, like that was like, well, you're like, oh, that's a cool building, right? Like we relate to the subject matter, like the subject, there's a story, we're like, oh, that building's awesome, I want to like run around inside of it or something like that. We have this kind of connection to it. Whereas I think something like Morandi, it's like, it's not like, oh, these bottles are awesome. I mean, there are cool bottles, but like we're not like excited or like just super jazzed up about the subject matter. Or someone like Cezanne, I think a lot of times like those still lifes are kind of the same way. It's like, what's exciting about a still life, right? Because the subject matter is kind of intentionally boring. It's really like, it's about this interplay of this kind of visual experience of like the pure interplay of the color and the form and the shapes, where we're just like, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really about like small things. It's like about interest in the way that the media interacts, or like it's about seeing the paint and what the paint does. And you could almost say that, so if we were to compare, so this Morandi picture is from this last century, but centuries before, wait, I'm gonna not get Pee Wee Herman when I look for Paul Rubens. So here's a painter, Paul Rubens, who had a big workshop in the Renaissance, and you can see that this picture, it doesn't really seem to, you don't really even see the paint, right? Maybe you see the gloss, but you're not really seeing brush strokes so much here, right? And so this is a time in which people weren't really trying to think about the qualities of the paint itself as being part of the image. If anything, they were trying to make the paint look invisible. They were trying to make it so the paint didn't matter that much. So you didn't really see it. So you only saw the stuff in the image, right? And you could almost say that the Morandi, which is interested in the very small interactions, is not too different from something like pixel art, right? Because when you look at the way that pixel art interacts, or the things that people really appreciate about pixel art, is seeing the small interactions between things, right? How does the grass turn into this, and how many little tiny choices were made? And you can see every tiny choice, right? And it's not trying to hide itself and say, oh, we're not made of squares. If anything, it's trying to contend with the fact that it's made of squares.
Right, that's a huge part of the pleasure of it, isn't it? I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think pixel art's a great example. I mean, of that like that's the pleasure of pixel art, right? You're not fooled. You're not like, oh my God, it's a real like farm. It's the charm of the artifice is what really gets us pulled into pixel art, right? We like the fact that we know that it's made out of pixels. That's part of it's like a visual aesthetic experience that we enjoy, you know. We know it's not gonna fool us that it's real. Whereas like the Rubens was more like, oh, we just want to like check out this big like dude and like he's carrying all this stuff. Like we're, you know, it's more like that narrative story kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of surrendering, you know, this image or a pixel art image surrenders to, let's say, the seams of the medium. You know, pixel art is a surrender to the grid. Whereas in the same way that, you know, this, the Morandi picture is a surrender to the fact that the image is made of paint.
Yeah.
It's showing the brushstrokes, it's surrendering to paint and talking about how beautiful that might be. Whereas this is trying to accomplish something in paint that transforms it into something else. So you don't really think about whether it's made of paint. And of course, if we were to look at a different game, one of my favorite recent games visually, Doom Eternal. Let's grab a nice screenshot here. We can start to see a connection here too, right? That a game like this, which is so high resolution that you can't really see the individual pixels, is working in a way that is similar to this image, right? So here you have digital artists trying to create something that hides the seams so that you can't really tell where the grid is, right? It's not about showing the making of things. It's about taking you into a completely different world and making the medium kind of invisible. And that's the same here. And then here you have examples of keeping that medium visible or keeping the lines, the evidence of what it's made in, right? So I think that's a nice parallel to draw here. And you could also say that, you know, depending on what you want to do when you enter Photoshop, right? Like, do you want to make something that feels digital or that feels like it's part of, that shows its seams, so to speak, you know? Or do you want to make something that turns that grid into a kind of window where you can't tell anymore what it is you're looking at? Those are kind of the two basic approaches to thinking about pictures historically. It's like, do you want to show the makings of the thing or do you want to hide the makings of the thing? And how does that change the meaning or the aesthetic of your image?
It's funny, people were like, oh, seeing Doom got me fired up. I thought the same thing. Is I was like, oh, I haven't played that one. I just played the 2016 one or whatever.
Right, yeah. Well, it's a good, you know, the studio that makes that game is historically interesting because they're also the studio that moved from having to make things and see the seams. So the idea that when you were first playing the 1993 version of Doom, they wish that it looked, they wish that it could have looked like the 2020 version, but they were forced to deal with the fact that you would still saw the pixels. Right. But the idea that the whole time this vision was a vision of trying to make the screen kind of an invisible window is kind of the same. Whereas, you know, with something like Stardew Valley, you know, that's a game that just came out a few years ago, an indie game. It's not an old game, but someone made the choice of not doing that, right? And so it's interesting, these different choices that you make. And the images in Stardew Valley, the pixel art in Stardew Valley is painted in the same software that the gun and the monster images of Doom are painted in, right? It's just different choices are made on how you put those pixels down. But the fact that they're both using raster-based software, both using Photoshop to make those images, and then after that structuring it with code, how the images show up is kind of interesting to me, right? They're both kind of using the same tools to do this stuff.
Yeah, you know, it's funny too. I mean, the other thing that strikes me about the Morandi, if you just pull that back, I haven't thought about Morandi for a while, but like, I was thinking about the aesthetic of this, and it's very peaceful. I mean, if you look at the Morandi, yeah, it's like it's very peaceful, pleasant. It is kind of more like Stardew Valley. It's like it's kind of got this chill. It's like it's chilling you out, right? It kind of makes you just feel like, oh, I can just hang out and just relax and be myself or something like that. There's something kind of like it kind of almost has like that. Like you can kind of see this as almost like that Apple aesthetic of like, you know, like the packaging where it's just like it's just white. And then there's a little titanium thing, and that's it. That's your life, you know,
right?
Like just this one thing, and then some slight color variation behind it, and that's all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of design aesthetic.
It's
interesting,
kind of zen,
you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's also a similar mood maybe between this image and like the Stardew Valley screenshot is what you're saying. Kind of a kind of simplicity there. And that simplicity comes out in also not doing too much, right? Or caring about small things, small interactions between things. I mean, I guess if we really wanted to see, I can just show a quick example of a historically important painterly kind of painter, a painter who showed all the brush strokes, for example, but is not maybe operating in the same mood, right? This is Soutine, and you can see all the brush strokes here, right? But this is maybe more like what the mood of the Doom Eternal screenshot, even though it's not being represented in the same way, right? It's not trying to hide, you know, we're not trying to hide the brush strokes here, right? We're not trying to create a transparent window into some other world, but we are kind of seeing a very different mood, right, take place here. And the mood is maybe a little bit more dark or chaotic or dangerous, right? So the idea that these moods are tied to techniques, like, can be true, but also, you know, you can get different moods with you can get the same moods with different techniques, I would say.
There's a really nice Soutine up in Portland if you get a chance to go up there at the Portland Art Museum. I think it's that show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's that yeah, it's a really, really cool painting. Yeah.
Yeah, Soutine is pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
I guess the more obvious analogy would be Francis Bacon.
Yeah.
But who makes some pretty elegant and dark pictures, portraits, using very few brushstrokes, very few moves.
Yeah.
On the canvas. You can see almost every single stroke in these paintings, which is kind of nice. And the paintings are about seeing those strokes and seeing those moves as well. There are some techniques for painting that really don't exist digitally too. For example, let me just show maybe some color field painters, and then we'll do one more drawing activity before the end of class. But like to use an abstract expressionist, to jump forward a little bit in time, Helen Frankenthaler is a really great example of an artist who mostly who wanted the paint to be seen in the pictures. Here's a picture of Helen. She wanted the paint to be seen in the pictures, but the way that she did that wasn't through brushstrokes, it was through pouring the paint directly onto surfaces. So making an image through pouring paint and letting it soak and dry, kind of like really large watercolors almost, right? But this is one of the reasons why watercolor tends to be kind of interesting to different artists, or kind of like continually interesting and poetic, is watercolor is always about kind of seeing that it is watercolor, but also kind of forgetting that it's watercolor, and the tension between that, right? But the idea that any medium you choose can be used to try to maybe erase itself. You know, when you choose an artistic medium, you want maybe the pencil itself to disappear, or the screen to disappear, or the watercolor to disappear. That's like a general desire that you don't want to show the makings of the thing. You want to transport people somewhere visually, right, outside of that medium itself. Children's picture books tend to be really good at this too. Like whether it's colored pencil or ink or whatever, they're really good at transporting you into that other world. And that's kind of like what that industry was all about. All right, time for one more painting exercise.
Do it.
Another 5 minutes, and then I'll show you all how to save these images and bring them into your notebook too. All right, let's see here. So I'm gonna just use the same picture that I've been working in. Although what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer on top using this little new layer button. I think. I might have to, for some reason these buttons aren't working for me today. I wonder if there's some kind of bug in this program right now. Let's see here.
I've noticed it can be janky for sure.
Yeah, sometimes, because when you make a new layer, it has to hit the server. There we go. One of the issues with multiplayer stuff, right, is like some actions that you do are local, which means they only affect your machine, and other actions that you do are going to be like global, which have to go to the server before you see them change. All right, so I'm going to just make a new layer that's a totally blank solid color using the paint bucket tool. And what I'd like us to do for this exercise is to just pick whatever colors you want at the beginning. Okay, so on the top of your painting, I want you to pick maybe like 3 or 4 colors, maybe a couple light or dark colors. Maybe you want a blue in there. Maybe you want a black and a white. So make a little section, a little space for a couple colors. No more than 6 colors. Just try to get a good range. Some bright ones, some dark ones. I have 5. Maybe I'll go for something like this now. So there's my 6 colors. And once you have your 6 colors, from now on, for the next 5 minutes, I only want you to use the eyedropper tool, which is holding down Control or Alt, to pick between those colors. And you're only allowed to draw with those colors and your eyedropper tool. So if you want to blend, you can pick, let's say, this color and this color and draw with them, and then try to blend by picking the in-betweens. But try to get good, or try to figure out how you might blend or fade between the different colors that you chose. So you can only use your color wheel just at the very beginning. And so I'll give you a second to do that now, to pick your colors. And then I'll set a 5-minute timer, and we'll do a painting using only those colors and the eyedropper. And in terms of your brush or your pencil tool or whatever, feel free to use whatever you like. So you can still change the size or the hardness or mess around with that. But the fact that you're only going to choose these colors and blend between them is the exercise. All right. 5 minutes on the clock, starting now. And I'll give you a 2-minute warning too. Remember, you can hold down Control or Alt, the Alt key, or the Option key on Mac to switch to your eyedropper.
Oh, did you talk about soft and hard brushes too?
Yeah, just briefly. You can make the size of your brush, or the edge of your brush, soft or hard, which makes either a kind of hard circle or a kind of faded circle. And that's right here on the right. Try to use all the colors in your palette. And most definitely try to blend between them. And don't feel like you have to paint anything specific, especially if you're just getting used to practicing here, trying to switch between colors and get used to it. those of you who are watching me, you can probably see how I'm starting to use the different colors to create colors that didn't exist in my original palette. We got about 2.5 minutes left. Maybe we'll extend this a bit. Let's do this for 10 minutes. Give you all some more time. So 5 minutes will just be the halfway point.
I was thinking, Jeffrey, I don't know of any. Do you know of any program that actually lets you make a palette? Like I was thinking about like more literally like what a painter's palette is. Like you could just kind of pick some colors like this and pull it off to the side and have a separate little file that's just sitting there on top of. That'd be kind of cool.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
Sai has an option similar to that.
Sai do that? Okay. Yeah.
Paint Tool SAI has a little window in which you can paint anything that you want, like a little scratch painting.
Oh, okay, that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, but the reason why most software doesn't have that is because it's kind of a standard technique to actually create a layer on top of your painting called like palette or something.
Yeah,
like
totally.
That.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or even to have a second image open, you know.
Yeah.
So most people it's one of those things where because it's so easy to do and everyone kind of does it in a different way,
right?
It's not necessarily in the software itself because it's assumed that you know to do that.
You can just do it.
Know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that creates a problem for beginners because they don't always do that or know that they can do that or that they should. All right, so halfway through, we'll just paint for another 5 minutes here. And just focus on blending the different colors in your palette and trying to maybe make it cut some kind of image. Now, of course, raster-based software, not this software, but other software has smudging tools and other ways that you can more easily blend between colors. But just the eyedropper gets most people pretty far. And yeah, and a lot of the best people will pretty much just stick to that unless they're trying to find a certain kind of effect or something. And a lot of times when people first start out, they might be thinking, oh, if I want to create fire or some cool effect, I should use a brush that has some kind of cool effect. But of course, everything can be painted. So if you want to create something that looks like it might be glowing or something like that, you can do that with pure color too. You can paint that thing using the simplest of techniques often.
God, I haven't been painting enough. That's just, it's funny as I'm doing
creating
this.
A little bit of a glowy thing.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
It makes me think about kind of how much I'm drawing in my kind of proclivities, but I mean, it's nice to just do some painting, you know.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between drawing and painting fundamentally.
Yeah.
And also it depends on the technique that you use, right? Some people really feel like I need to draw before I paint. And they kind of see painting as something that happens at the end of drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And other people might see painting as just something that they do, and they don't even think of themselves as people who draw. I have a lot of friends who are painters, who studied painting, and they barely draw. They don't really think about drawing
Yeah.
so much, but they still are able to create some pretty fantastic paintings. So the idea that these skills are related, but also can be different, and that painting is more dealing with color and application of color, and drawing is more dealing with structure and linear forms, is creates a lot of different techniques and mindsets about it. All right, we got 2.5 minutes left.
Yeah, this is bringing back for me, man, kind of how much like painting was really about the pleasure of color, and for me in a lot of ways, like about how much just really subtly changing something just in a purely abstract way, like not representational, but how much it was about creating this kind of like really kind of giddy, pleasurable, just kind of beautiful experience, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, depending on the environment that you use, the media that you use, it's more fun or less fun. And also when you're a beginner with something, it's often not so fun because you're not so familiar with things.
Right.
So I'm sure, Miles, it sounds like you probably used to paint in Photoshop or with a Wacom tablet. And so you're kind of like remembering nice experiences that you've had. But I'm sure other people in the class right now are probably like still trying to develop a relationship with making a picture on the computer. And so
I'm
it might
thinking
not
like
feel
oil
that
paint.
pleasurable,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm thinking about oil paint, which I hated the first several times I used it. I was like, this sucks. Because it felt so out of control. But it started to make sense when it just kind of became more about like having fun with it or something. But yeah, totally. It's kind of like that fear where you don't have control over something. I definitely had that feeling with paint at first, like, what's happening?
So we got about 30 seconds here to finish up this exercise. I'm going to have a little fun on mine and use the eraser tool to actually show my layer from underneath my black and white painting, I think. Let's see how that is. The eraser tool is just like the brush tool, but you can use it to actually have the layers interact by erasing pixels on your layer or making them all transparent. All right, so time's up for this exercise, and we have about 6 minutes left of class. So rather than sharing your images in class today, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna show you actually how you can bring this image into Figma in a really easy way. And so if you wanna share these in the recitations or have them in your notebook, I recommend you just follow along with me and throw it in there. So, all you really have to do is go to File and then click Share as PNG, or you can export as a JPEG. I'm going to click Share as PNG. And that will create a URL for you, kind of like a separate web page. It jumps you to a new page. And then we'll just put your image here. And now you can download the image, you can drag it. I'm just going to hit Copy Image. And then I'm going to open up a Figma document. And I'll just paste it right in there. So just export as PNG, copy image, and paste, basically. Where'd my page go? There it is. So for those of you who want to give it a try, you can, there it is. Pop it right in, and then it's there for good. And so what's nice about this is as you're actually making a painting, for example, let's say you're making a painting that takes 2 or 3 hours, every half hour, you could export and put it in a Figma document and actually just keep track of your progress. Like, this is where I was an hour ago. This is where I was, before that and before that. And so you can use Figma as a nice way to keep track of your progress in an image, whether you're using this Magma software or another software. But it's really easy to just share. You basically just hit this one button, share as PNG, and then you can copy the file. Yeah.
Cool.
And that's pretty much it. So I know a lot of you in class really love to paint and draw and are thinking about your career as a digital artist more as a concept artist or wanting to make art for video games and things. And I think that this software is really nice right now, one, because you can do stuff with other people, and two, because especially within this class, it works really well with Figma. You can copy images over, and let's say you wanted to fix up something, you can think about making notes on an image or thinking about what went wrong or what went right. And sort of use these two pieces of software in tandem with one another, one to organize things and one to actually make things or make your images. All right, any final questions before we adjourn for the day?
I made this sick background in Figma.
Oh, nice. Is that from, did you just import that?
Yeah, I just brought this in, but I mirrored it, like, so it made it into like this Rorschach thing. So it's 4 pieces, you know, so it was fun to just kind of go, oh, that's cool. Like it, kind of a surprisey little thing, dropped it underneath. Yeah, how cool is that? You can just just doing a little goofing around and bring something in, and you've got something different, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, I like that it's you know, it's one thing to open up Photoshop and all your creative suite software, but it's another thing to just have a few tabs open, working on things and being able to interact with things that way.
Yeah.
And I think that it's kind of interesting because this is kind of a hint at what working on projects like this will look like in the coming years, flipping back and forth between the raster environment, the vector environment, maybe a video editor is going to become faster and also more of a multi-user kind of experience. So it's cool to kind of get into this stuff right now.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, those of you who were just watching me or weren't following the tutorials, you know, feel free to paint on your own, but we're not going to grade the exercises or anything like that. That's just for you if you wanted to do them. And yeah, we'll see you Wednesday.
Yeah, cool. All right.
All right, peace, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.